Hi, this is Claire Praetzia from Berry Do Papery, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make these two cards that both use the same stamp set, inks, and woodblock stamp, but this first one is a little more clean and simple, and the second one has more dimension. Both of these cards use a stamp set that is part of the 2018 My Monthly Hero limited edition kit, but the design principle pretty much remains the same, so you can use it for your own designs, even without the same stamps. This is the 2018 My Monthly Hero Kit stamp set. It's a color layering stamp set. It's a little bit unusual from most color layering sets because it's not flowers or some other kind of image like an animal. It's got this love and an ampersand, and the base layer is really beautiful, can totally be used by itself. The second layers add a bunch of intricate swirls and flourishes, and it's just super cool and unique. So, I mean, you can use the second layer by itself too if you wanted to. I guess you can do whatever you want with the stamp set, but together they make a very beautiful combination. So for my card today, I'm going to start out by stamping the Artistic Dahlia in soft vanilla on some cardstock that I already have cut down to an A2 card size. So I'm just going to stamp this Artistic Dahlia. I'm going to stamp it on some scratch paper first because I'm really bad about cleaning my stamps. Part of it is I'm lazy, part of it is I'm super forgetful. So if I'm in the middle of a project and I stamp it in something and then I don't use it later on, I might completely forget to clean it. So after I've stamped it on scratch paper, I'm going to ink it up in soft vanilla again and then just stamp it on this cardstock. I'm gonna have these two dahlias going at an angle, and just kind of looking at my wood block to see how I want to position that dahlia. So it's not going to be exact where it stamps. You know, wood blocks, you can't see through them, so sometimes the positioning might be a little bit off, but I wasn't really worried if they overlapped because this ink is very soft and you're not really going to be able to tell if it does overlap, and even if it did, we're going to be stamping the love sentiment right on top of that, so it's going to, you know, the eye is going to be drawn more to the love than any overlap of the images. So I'm using my Misty position to stamp this love, and I'm making sure that the O, that's kind of how I'm keeping my love straight. I'm making sure that if you bisected that O, then it would be perpendicular with, or the top and the bottom are parallel with the sides. So I'm going to ink that up in Rose Madder and then just stamp that. I actually don't even, this was the first time, I've been practicing using the stamp set on scratch paper, and for the video I just decided to use the Misty, but every time I stamped it on scratch paper I didn't have any problems with it, so I don't know, I just decided to use the Misty for the video. So if you're going to add the second layer, to kind of line it up, look for the tails on the E and the L. There's these like little leafy things in the tails that kind of come out of those letters, and that matches up perfectly with the base layer, so that's how you can really easily line up. Again, I've been practicing on scratch paper and I had no problems lining them up. The first time I actually stamped this, I wasn't even paying attention to those little tails and exactly how it should line up. So even then I got almost I was almost on par for how it was supposed to be stamped. It looked great either way, even if it wasn't perfect. So that second layer was stamped in Raspberry Jam, and now I'm going to go ahead and stamp this second sentiment. There's a bunch of little accompanying tiny little sentiments that go with this stamp set, and one of them is you and so much. So I just stuck those together, and then I heat embossed them in gold on black cardstock. I'm actually not going to use that sentiment, but we'll get to that at the end of the video. So for the second card, again, I'm stamping the Artistic Dahlia in soft vanilla, and I'm just going to do just the top of the card. I already had an idea for how I wanted to kind of plot this card out, so again, I wasn't really worried about overlap, and if I hadn't planned ahead, I probably would have stamped the ampersand first, but I kind of knew what I wanted to do with this card, so I knew I wanted those two dahlias on the top and then this ampersand to the bottom right. So I'm going to stamp the ampersand in Rose Madder again, and I didn't use the Misty for this one. It's a lot smaller anyway, and it stamps perfectly. so pretty by itself, but I decided to go ahead and add some raspberry jam. And again, you kind of look for the tails on the ampersand and just kind of line those up and you'll get a perfect little match. I think aside from the first time that I stamped this, and I wasn't even paying attention to how you were supposed to do it, I think that was the only time I did not get a perfect alignment. And even then it was pretty close. So now I want to add some of those additional little sentiments, you and then me, and I'm going to use a pencil to lightly sketch a line so I can make sure that they're parallel with the top and the bottom of the cardstock. You could use a ruler to do this, but I was too lazy to pull out my super long metal ruler, so I just used a piece of scratch paper that had already been cut down to A2, so I knew all the angles were right angles, and if I use this paper, if I aligned the edge of the paper with the edge of my cardstock, then I could get almost a completely parallel line with the top and the bottom of the card. But if you're someone who likes measuring, then you do you. Go ahead and measure up. So I stamped the me on the line using raspberry jam. I didn't actually end up stamping the you on the line. I stamped a little bit below the line, but on the same angle. I didn't think if I had stamped the U on the exact same line as the me, it didn't fit inside the ampersand quite as well, and I thought visually it looked like it was above the me, even when it was on the same line. So sometimes letters and words do that, so it doesn't, even if you do measure everything out perfectly, sometimes it'll still look a little bit off. Or maybe that's just my excuse for being lazy. So now I'm going to stamp this Artistic Dahlia once more on the bottom left corner. And now this is where we're going to really make this card pop. So the first card was pretty simple, and here's how you can step it up with this Artistic Dahlia. It comes, doesn't come with, but you can buy these these layering dies? Yeah, well, they're coordinating dies. You can buy them separately. There's 4 dies, and they cut out different pieces of the flower. So I'm going to use the 2 smallest ones that cut out the very center of the flower and then the second small ring. And you see I've stamped the Artistic Dahlia 6 more times, and I've cut them out. And if you wanted to, you could cut out the entire dahlia. See here, this is the smallest one. And the second smallest, those are the 2 I used. They're pretty easy to align. And then you can cut out the entire flower and then the entire flower with the leaves. So after I've cut all of these, I add a little bit of pearls to them. I wanted to give them a little bit of dimension. So I die cut a bunch of extra cardstock that was just scrap cardstock. I like to do this a lot when I stamp on my good cardstock for a project and I don't like how it turns out. Instead of throwing it away, I will use it as scrap cardstock to add dimension to later projects. Because the cardstock I use is 110 pounds, so it's thicker than a lot of cardstock. So like if you use it to add dimension, it will be noticeable. Versus if you're using computer paper, which is usually pretty thin, and you'd have to stack up a lot of those layers to get any noticeable dimension. I just didn't want to use foam because with all the layers that would have been way too much. So then I'm just going to use some scrappy glue to adhere this together. It's my favorite kind of liquid glue because it doesn't really warp the paper and it's pretty manageable to use. So that finishes off the ampersand card, just trimmed off the sides. And with the Love You So Much, I changed out the black sentiment because I thought it was too stark. So I took a piece of cardstock and I covered it with raspberry jam, and then I heat set it and then covered it with anti-static powder and then stamped and heat embossed the You So Much. So that way the color actually coordinated with the love. I really like coloring my own cardstock with ink. I will just make one comment. It depends, well, I'm guessing it depends on which manufacturer's ink that you're using and on which color or tints that you're using, but sometimes the ink tends to kind of, I don't know, bleed through the embossing a little bit. I've noticed when I have really dark cardstock that I colored with ink, let's say navy, or I like to use grape juice, that maybe a month later, if I did white heat embossing on it, the white heat embossing will have taken on a little bit of the tint of that ink. which is fine because it matches the card anyway. That was the whole point of custom coloring the cardstock. But I just wanted to point out that I have noticed that happen with some of the really dark inks. I haven't really tried it with light inks so much because the white embossing doesn't pop out as much on white. And I don't know about different colors of embossing, let's say gold or silver. I have a feeling those wouldn't be affected as much by the tint of the ink that you use. So I've noticed that with the darker Hero Arts inks that I've used. So it might, you know, vary if you're using a different manufacturer and different tints. But just wanted to point that out. That's something that I've noticed. So that finishes off both of the cards, and if you have any questions or comments, then you can do so on either the YouTube video or you can do it on the blog, and I'll have supplies linked on the blog and then supplies listed in the YouTube description. So thanks so much for watching and have a great day. God bless.